Hello, fellow nature nerds. Welcome to Dirt Dispatch number 7. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara. Now, in the first episode of Dirt Dispatches, I was venting about educating a gentleman on the internet, which I know is a bad idea, about wolves and deer in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And he was claiming without any sources or evidence other than I've seen more wolves than deer on my game camera, that wolves were decimating the deer population in the Upper Peninsula. Now, the main driver of deer populations in most places is what's called fawn recruitment rate. So the number of fawns that actually survive long enough to become reproductive adults. And he was making this claim on the social media site of the Voyageurs Wolf Project, who study wolves in northern Minnesota. Now, they just recently published something interesting. Studies in northern Minnesota in wolf range found that 40 to 47% of deer fawns survive at least their first few months. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but a meta-analysis looking at fawn survival rate in North America in forested ecosystems found that the average fawn survival rate was about 41%. And yeah, the primary cause of death for deer fawns is predation. But a recent study in a predator-free area of Delaware determined that fawn survival rate in the absence of predators was only about 44%. So, in other words, even in the absence of predators, fawns are still going to die of either starvation, malnutrition, disease, or birth defects. So wolf pups actually fare much worse. Only about 30 to 38% of wolf pups survive their first year. And the number one factor involved in wolf survival, wolf pup survival, is starvation. So I found that interesting, and I hope that gentleman was still following the Voyageurs Wolf Project social media sites and read that study as well, although I doubt it changed his mind. Okay, the other cool thing I saw this week, last week we were having a fire pit, we were cooking some s'mores, kind of hanging out, and I saw this critter next to my fire pit, and it was a camel spider, also known as a sun spider or a wind scorpion or a solifuge. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but most of the time people call them camel spiders, sun spiders, or wind scorpions, even though they are actually not a spider and they're not a scorpion. They are an arachnid, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about them because I think that's what I'm going to do my next full episode of the Dispatches from the Forest podcast on. But they're really kind of cool. They actually look like they have 10 legs, but the front two are pedipalps. They're not actually legs. Their function is mostly sensory. They kind of hold them out. They don't quite touch the ground, and they're used to detect obstacles or prey, and they prey mostly on ground-dwelling arthropods, so centipedes, millipedes, spiders, other insects. They're really kind of cool. And one thing I read said they weren't native here, that they were hitched the ride over from the Middle East on soldiers returning from Desert Storm. That's absolutely not true. There's actually about 200 species that are native to North America, and they mostly live in arid and semi-arid environments, which explains why they're here in Wyoming. So if you want to learn more about them, tune in to the next episode of the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. I'm going to talk all about things that are arachnids, but not spiders. So that should be pretty interesting. I hope you enjoy it. That's all I have for you today. If you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron. You can find all that information at patreon.com/dispatches from the forest. You can also check out our merch store and all it has to offer. cafepress.com/shop/dispatches from the forest. There's all kinds of stuff there. If you want to send me an email, if you have a suggestion for a future episode or a question or a comment, or you want to make a donation via PayPal, you can do that at dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dirt Dispatches is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.